This is Philippa calling to start our interview with you and me about our discussion on managing editorial offices for the class that I'm teaching at GW.
Oh,
Sue, I'd like to introduce you to my both distance and in-class students who come from a variety of backgrounds and are all over the country and are eager to get your expert opinions and perspectives on what we have been talking about this past week. So welcome aboard.
thank you.
And class, please meet Dr. Sue Silver, who is currently the editor-in-chief of a prominent and increasingly prominent journal called Frontiers in Ecology and the Environment, which is a membership benefit peer-reviewed indexed journal produced by the Ecological Society of America. I would call it, in a way, a hybrid journal because it not only includes peer review articles, but also has news and opinions and essays and a variety of other kinds of things to keep members of the Ecological Society engaged and intertwined with each other. Would you say that is a accurate representation, Sue?
Pretty much. But we do have readers beyond ESA, all around the world, in fact. But they are mostly ecologists or people working with ecological data or who have some kind of interest in that topic.
Well, in fact, to my understanding, you're really going towards policymakers. I mean, all of your peer-reviewed pieces need to have some sort of practical policy implications. Is that correct?
Yes, but the way it works is they're aimed at the scientist who works with policymakers and resource managers. The idea is to give them the science that they need, for their professional work life, but also give them understandable material that they can pass on to non-scientists and say, here, this is important, you need to understand this, and then give them something that they'll be able to understand.
And prior to your work with the ESA, you worked for the Lancet, and you launched a journal called Lancet Oncology in the UK. So you've had experience launching and starting up and setting up the workflows and the staff and the policies and procedures in count them, two prestigious STM journals.
Yep, and was a member of staff of several other journals before that. So I've been in publishing for a ridiculous number of years now.
Well, you have a lot to offer our students, and I'm thankful to you for being willing to share your perspectives and expertise with us. So I gave you a little bit of a preview of the questions that I was going to ask you. And I also told you that in this period of time right now in our class, we're talking about not only the editorial workflow itself, getting a paper in to the transom through whatever it needs to go through and out into publication, but also all those extra stresses that come onto an editorial office, and I'm going to be asking you some questions about that as well.
Sure.
Okay, so the first thing that we talked about was that we'd like you to talk on is what you think are the primary characteristics of a good manager in an editorial office.
Okay, well, the first thing that I have to say is just to make it clear that the team for Frontiers is just 3 people. It's a very small team, and so that's going to be very different from when I was working at Lancet, where although my team was, again, only 3 people, I was able to watch a very much larger team of 15 or 16 people who put the Lancet main journal together. So having said that, I think primarily the characteristics of a good manager in an editorial office is pretty much the same as in any office. You have to be able to work with people, you have to be able to communicate what you want, keep the peace between everybody, make them feel appreciated. Those are all general characteristics. And I think on top of that, for editorial offices, the two main things you have to be aware of are, the time, the deadlines that are going to be coming up all the time. So you've got to make sure that all the team members are working to those deadlines.
Well, it's one of the things that I put in the PowerPoints and the lectures that I've been presenting. I keep on saying it's all about timing. It's all about timing. That being said, that it's also, having everybody know what the timing is. So it's having schedules and having some sort of representation of those schedules that everybody can look at. If I remember correctly, in your office, you have a great big whiteboard.
Yes.
That has the schedules on, and when things change, you kind of erase. It's almost like a surgical board, right? You erase that and say, you're going to, where things are changing a little bit.
We're very retro in the office because the three of us need to keep in constant touch, and we need to know, because each of us does a little bit of everything. Yeah. So on that whiteboard, we list out each phase of what we're doing, when it goes to authors for checking, when it comes back, when it goes off to the designer, and when it comes back, so that anybody can look at the board and see where any particular piece of the current issue is in the production schedule.
Now, on that whiteboard that you have, which I must admit I haven't seen for a while, but that being said, do you have anything about, for example, I know you're not doing, when a tweet might go out or when a podcast might, that's a completely different schedule.
That's different.
Is that right?
When I said we have a team of 3, that's actually not quite right, because we also have an intern, and our current intern, who began in January, has opened up a whole new world for us, and we are, for the first time in the 12 years of publication, tweeting from Frontiers, but that's entirely down to her. And all the communications in that particular case are entirely verbal and are really about me running to her and going, what should we tweet today? She's doing a wonderful job of teaching us, how to communicate in this new way, which is a steep learning curve for me, but she's really very expert at it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm going to go on with the questions, but there are a lot of things I'd love to continue to talk to you about on that score. But moving ahead, what would you say are the greatest scheduling challenges that you've encountered in your role leading STM publications, whether at Frontiers or Lancet or other places?
Well, hands down winner has got to be the whole peer review system. If you can't get that moving and on time and relative in a timely manner, you're not going to have anything to publish. And the problem is you're dealing with an enormous number of unpaid volunteers, peer reviewers and associate editors. If the journal in question, has that kind of a system, you're not paying them, you have no control over them, and yet you need to somehow get them to do this work for you. And, these are all busy people who are shooting around all over the world, doing their science and going to conferences, and getting them to sit down and peer review papers for you and write reports has to be the greatest challenge for any journal that has, peer reviewed papers in it. Against that, anything that happens in the office, unless there's a major snowstorm and or something, there's no electricity or something, everything else, if you have your schedule and everything is reasonably well mapped out, you'll be going through that same cycle over and over again each month or each week or 4 times a year, whatever it is, and the team should pretty much know what is required and when it's required by. So that's to me, that's all fairly easy to control, leaving aside, acts of God. So it's really all about controlling all those unpaid volunteers out there who are absolutely, key to getting material to publish.
Now, so what you're talking about, what you're saying is that in your little editorial office, you can set up standard operating procedures and timing that you can pretty much control.
Yes.
But once things get even a small step outside your editorial office, that's where the unknowns come in.
Yeah.
And a big unknown is with associate editors and peer reviewers being bigger wild cards than the associate editors.
Yeah.
But then there are also all those other people who you need to go to and who come to you at
sure
somewhat of an ad hoc
and
basis.
let's not forget the authors, who are also completely wild cards.
How could I forget?
Because at some stage after the first round of peer review, material is going to go back to them for further, for any changes they need to make. And they also are busy people who go off to do field work and heaven knows what else. And so, again, it's a whole group of people that you absolutely are relying on to do the work and get it back to you, but you're not paying them, you have no control over them. And that's where the challenges come, certainly in my little world.
Yes. So once you've accepted a paper and maybe it needs revision or some tweaking here and there, keeping those cats herded is another significant challenge.
Well, that's all happening before acceptance. After acceptance, we're into the production phase. And then a lot of the work is being done in the office, though, of course, once we've edited the paper, it goes back to the authors. And again, there comes a bit of an unknown, timing. Really, the best way to be, if it's at all possible, is to have a bank of papers that are ready to roll. If you've got them all lined up, if you can create that sort of bank of material, then each time it comes time to put together a journal, you can just go to that bank and pull out the papers. And in the meantime, in the background, the team are preparing more papers to put in the bank.
That's a great way to represent that. So you keep a sort of a planned backlog.
We have a little backlog. Of course, every editor's nightmare is that the backlog gets too big, because then the authors start complaining that you're slow to publish. And speed is what it's all about these days. Nevertheless, that, if you can get that cushion, then, you can sleep easier at night.
Does Frontiers have a publish before print setup?
Yes, it does. And that's really our bank. That's where we go for the paper.
Okay. So are they all tagged and sort of ready to go in PDF form?
They're in PDF form. And then we just bring them down, give them one last check, invite the authors to have one last check, and then they go into the print journal.
Okay.
For us, though, because, as you said in your introduction, we have a news section, we have a columnist, we have letters, so all of that needs to be created within the production cycle of that journal. The papers,
to keep that in. To keep that amalgam current.
Yeah. So, for instance, there's a whole little production cycle for the news section that goes on within the month that we're preparing the next journal.
And you have to manage that.
Yes, that's
not your staff.
Well, I have taken on the role of sort of news desk editor because I like it, and they're going to have to prise it out of my cold dead hands because I enjoy it so much.
Okay. And you also have someone who writes a very well-liked essay every month.
He's our back page columnist. Yeah, he's absolutely fantastic. And there again, speaking of banks, he's currently got 4 or 5 of his columns lined up, all written, for us to pull out and just quickly edit when we're putting together the next issue of the journal. So Great. At least he's no worry to us at all. And it has to be said, our news writers whom we do pay, they're all professional journalists, and again, they hit their deadlines every time, so they're no trouble at all either.
Yeah, yeah. So you've got a whole bunch of different gears going with different kinds of information that are in large and small increments in different styles, but they all have to mesh in at the same time.
Yes.
So that's why you are a master at what you do, madam. All right, so just moving ahead. You, to some extent, you've touched upon this question, or the significant challenges that are not related to schedule and timing. I'm trying to think of, one or two, if you can give one or two examples of things that have really gummed up the works that have nothing to do
Sure.
with the timing of the processing.
Okay.
It could be that all the electricity went down, or, I don't know.
No, it's
But
not.
can you give a couple of examples?
Sure. The first one is our somewhat clunky old online submission system, which is forever causing problems. Somebody once said of it that it's really great technology for the 1970s. Unfortunately, we're still dealing with it now. And every now and again, we get some aggrieved author contacting us and saying, I can't upload my paper, I can't upload my figures. And then it's down to one of my wonderful assistant editors to try and help that person to get it all sorted out. And that wastes a huge amount of his time, because up until recently, it happened quite frequently. Our vendors have managed to fix some of the problems now, but there's always going to be better technology, better software, better computers or screens or something that, you're going to wish that if the journal only had the funds, you could get, and that would make your life a whole lot easier. But of course, not.
Well, let me just follow on with one question. So let's say the journal had the funds. Let's say magically it had the funds, and you could either buy the latest and greatest version of your current vendor software, or get the software of some new marvelous vendor who did peer review. That would still be a bit of a quagmire for you, wouldn't it? Because you'd have to transition from what you're doing to a new system, and that would mean training of a lot of different people. You would have to learn it, your staff would have to learn it,
Sure.
Your associate editors would have to learn it, so there would be a phase-in of that.
It all depends what it is. If it's a better version of our current system, then probably not a huge amount of training just to get everybody up to speed. If it was something completely new, then obviously we'd need a lot more time. I mean, but, what sort of things do I dream about? There's some pre-editing software out there that would style all the references, all the citations automatically, saving us all a vast amount of time.
Yes.
If we could afford it,
It's very interesting that you say this, because I've been having some conversations with my students about publishers being involved in the authoring side of things, and sort of the semantic web, when the web and tools and everything and publishing are all meshing together. Mm-hmm. And they said, oh, well, that could be an ethical conflict if publishers are involved with authoring. And I had to have this back and forth with them, saying, no, we're talking about tools. We're not talking about intellectual content or influence on the generation of intellectual fodder. We're just talking about tools for writing, that kind of thing. So, I mean, I think it's great that you mentioned that these kinds of tools are very attractive to people in editorial roles, because they just build in the underpinnings of some of the things that can be time sinks in an editorial office, yep. Right?
That one right there, because currently we have to go through each paper and make sure that if it mentions figure 1, that there actually is a figure 1 available, and that if it talks about Smith and Jones 1990, that is mentioned in the reference list. All that has to be done currently, just by one of us. and
Right.
how lovely it would be if one of these pre-editing tools were available to us. All of that would be done automatically, leaving us more time to sort of work with, beautification of the language and that kind of thing, and clarification. As you know, Frontiers is very big on being really reader friendly and accessible because we have this very broad audience, from students to professors and forest managers and all kinds of different people. And we try to make sure that everything in the journal is going to be understandable and readable. So a lot of our time is spent rewriting text. It'd be great if we
Yes.
didn't also have to do all of that mechanical stuff.
Yes, and you're sort of at the opposite. I'm cutting a pretty broad swath between black and white, but there are some journals now that virtually do no editing, and Frontiers, you put a very, very high value on highly readable, coherent, and sort of thoughtfully shaped texts,
Yes.
which is one of the reasons I think that the journal has had such a increasing readership and uh, devoted readership to it. But let me keep going on
Sure.
these questions. So can you tell us any sort of tricks that you've learned or developed to help keep manuscripts moving through from intake to publication? Are there any special little things that you do or that you've trained your staff to do to keep everybody happy and the wheels
Well, I
greased?
was trying to think of, what I would talk about for this particular question, and the only thing that came to mind immediately was so one of the assistant editors, Pete Moorside, is in charge of our online submission system, and he is the one who contacts, all these different peer reviewers and associate editors and authors and tries to keep everything going. And every now and again, rather more frequently than we could wish, they basically blank him and he sends out several emails and they simply don't respond because they're too busy and they can't be bothered right now or whatever. And so what we say is he wheels out the thermonuclear option, which is me. And unfortunately or fortunately, it works. Suddenly they get an email from the editor-in-chief and they sit up and take notice. And it's really unfair because I'm asking exactly the same thing as Pete is, but oh, the editor-in-chief, now I really better actually do what I said I would do. So, you've got to keep something back in reserve, something that is going to make people take notice. So you try several times the normal way, and then you have something, more compelling to.
Well, it's interesting. I've used the metaphor, at least in my class. I've really been stressing the metaphor of big dogs and little dogs. And so what you're saying is when there's a little or medium-sized dog who keeps on barking, saying, please do this, please do that,
Yes.
you need to have a big dog in the back room to come out
Yes,
and
that
snarl.
that's one way. And I always, you don't even have to snarl, but somehow, you impress upon them that, they really need to do this. And unspoken is the threat that, you might not look kindly on their next publication if you,
Aha! A veiled threat, then.
yeah, without ever having to say anything. Somehow
Yes.
there's just a slight fear that I won't look favorably on the next paper that comes in, which of
Yeah.
course is not the case. But, if it's a good paper and I want it, to hell with what they did last time. But,
Right.
you have to have something to.
No, but that's a very good pointer. That's a very good pointer, is to, to keep some ammunition in your back pocket.
Exactly.
Um, so now, just moving on, the last couple of questions, as I mentioned, I really want to talk to you about the people that you work with outside the editorial office, within the organization, and the kind of draw that they have on your time and on the time and energy and resources of the editorial offices. So I wonder if you can kind of list off the categories of different kinds of professionals outside the editorial office that you have to interact with on a regular basis, and what you feel about working with them, and the kind of time and energy constraints they put on your small team.
Mm. Yeah, but it always in a positive way. I mean, it's good to be working with all those people because they're all doing something towards putting the journal together.
Yeah.
Again, it's always a question of, what the circumstances are for each journal. But in our case, we have a designer who, actually lays out the pages and, does what used to be called typesetting, except it's all electronic now. And obviously we work with him on a day-to-day basis. And, as we ask for changes to the text, he's the one that actually does them. So there's that.
If I can interrupt you for 1 second,
Sure.
I want to just encourage the students watching this to go to Frontiers. Frontiers has it's Frontiers in Ecology and the Environment, and there are a number of different issues that are open access, so you can get to them and look at the entire journal if you can. Just scan through an entire issue and look at the PDF pages as a representation. They're very beautifully designed and very attractive when they're put together. And I believe, Sue, you do the InDesign files and that you sort of conceptualize of the journal up front as a front to back publication, and then it's HTML coded and XML.
That's correct.
XML coded afterwards, so it's back tagged.
It's back tagged, that's right. And if anybody is looking at Frontiers, click on the special issues section because they're the ones that are open access.
Okay.
And our news section and our backpage columnist are also open access. So you just need to look for the little unlocked symbol to see all the bits that anybody can look at. Yeah, we also obviously have our host, our online host, who also happens to be our printer. We tend to be in touch with them. Once a week we have a sort of telephone meeting just to talk about any issues or problems, but otherwise they don't really swing into action until we're just about to pass for press. And then they receive the files from our designer when we've passed everything. And then after that, it's in their hands. We get a blue line to look at, and then
digital
blue line. It used to be paper, but now it's on screen. And again, great technology where you can look at it all and see it made up as if it's an actual journal. I mentioned we have our intern who's in charge of our social media program, which is very new, and we're still learning a lot about how to do that. We also, at the Ecological Society, we have a communications officer. I was talking to her just today, telling her what's going to be in the April issue, so she can decide what she wants to blog about, what she maybe would do a press release about.
So the journal doesn't have a blog, but the society has a blog that it draws from.
Both.
It draws from the journal.
Both our journal and, the ESA does 5 other journals, and obviously they cover material from them as well. I have the advantage that I'm in the same office location as our communications officer, and so I can actually wander into her office and tell her all the exciting things that are coming up in the current issue. So again, it's always, I see that as a very positive thing, to be able to tell her, all the good stuff that's coming and see what she might like to publicize, if you like.
Right.
We also have to work with an advertising manager. He's sort of part of the team, but he works independently, getting advertising for each issue. So there's a question of allocating him pages, and then if he sells more than the space that's been allocated, then we have to try and find some more space for him, because basically we need the money. In the ESA, we have an annual meeting every year, so just around this time of year we're looking for space to put in advertising about the annual meeting, to remind members that it's coming up and that they need to register. Every now and again, there would be somebody else who wants, at the beginning of the year, for instance, the membership department would like us to put in something about, please remember to renew your membership. And we have a little flash on the cover of the February issue, which is the first issue of the year. We don't have a January issue, saying, if you don't renew your membership, this is going to be your last issue of Frontiers.
Right.
And hopefully that will jog their memories and get them to go online and renew their membership.
Is that something, I mean, you've been at ESA now for a number of years. Is that something that you sort of have as an annual reminder, you know,
Yes.
or is it on your calendar? Do you communicate it with your staff? Or
We sort of just know that first issue of the year is where we remind members that it's time to join up. We only introduced the flash on the cover about 3-4 years ago. The reason was that we used to be the journal used to be posted in a plastic bag, and so we used to blow in a reminder on a separate loose leaf piece of paper.
Right.
But really, you can't be the Ecological Society of America and have all that plastic. And we had a lot of members who were really unhappy about it. And we finally got rid of the plastic bags, and it goes out just with an address sticker stuck on it.
Yeah.
But that means you can no longer blow in loose leaves. So the first year that we were out of our plastic bag, we had to think of a new way of telling members that it was time to renew their membership.
Right.
And that's when we developed a full-page ad that goes in that first issue of the year and put the flash on the cover and hope that that gets the message across.
And is that ad created by the membership team? Is it outside of your office and they just give you the artwork?
We did that.
So you do it in collaboration with the marketing and membership people?
We put together an ad and we ran it by them, and they tweaked it a bit, and then our designer actually designed it, and you know it came out looking really good.
Great.
We managed to find some a picture of somebody holding a credit card in one hand and typing with the other, and we've got that as the backdrop to the whole ad. So it came out pretty nice.
So you're doing a bit of artwork on this, or art design.
Yeah. Well, we had, we create our cover every issue. We have the template for it, but it's up to us to choose the 2 photographs that will make up the cover, and try and find 2 that are going to look good together and that somehow represent one of the papers in the issue. We search for photos to go with some of the news stories, to go with our back page columnists' story. So we get quite a lot of picture research on a month-to-month basis as well.
So it sounds like, even though you've got this pretty streamlined, you're in a, I would say medium small STM publication office there, yes, where you have pretty tight control, and you're able, I think because of your extreme experience, you were able to come into ESA and put together this journal, which really has become one of the best read journals in the field, because you have, a lot of experience behind you to put all these mesh parts together. And then you're also pulling in all these, the designers, the membership, the marketing, the policy people. Also, I remember you're talking about when there are environmental disasters. I'm sure you're going to do something on the Galveston oil spill. I'm sure you'll have some news on that.
Being a monthly, it's actually hard to be really responsive like that. Yeah. So we often can't. But on the other hand, we can highlight, more ongoing stories. I'm particularly excited at the moment because we published a letter about pangolins, and that letter has gone. I wouldn't exactly say gone viral, but it's certainly received an enormous amount of attention, and we're, raising consciousness of the fact that pangolins are being poached more than even elephants and rhinos and tigers, and that they're fast disappearing.
They're not really a flagship
They
species, but they will become one.
they perhaps not as romantic as elephants and tigers, but they're in deep trouble, and
Oh,
you
but
know
they're very
they're
cute.
very cute. And
um,
so we get the chance to raise those kinds of issues. We can't respond quickly to something when we're not going to be published for another 5 weeks or 4 weeks or
yeah,
something,
yeah,
but
yeah,
we
yeah,
can cover some stories that have a sort of longer shelf life.
yeah, yeah. So, just trying to close here, I'm wondering if there are two or three trends that you would advise young publishing professionals to pay attention to. Um,
Yeah, my goodness. It's the word new is always there. New technologies, new metrics, new ways of measuring success. They're changing. These things are sort of changing all the time. New attitudes among readers that somehow you need to be aware of and be flexible about satisfying as these things change. Journals are actually they're very big ships in terms of they can't just turn on a dime, and you can't be changing a journal every other month, but somehow you have to sort of look ahead and see what sort of things you are going to be able to make subtle but important changes that will somehow keep all these new expectations, satisfied.
yeah,
So, in our case, finally we got round to doing some tweeting, and it seems to be taking off really well. We've got a ton of followers, and you know, it just
more so than Facebook. I mean, are you
yeah, we
catching
have
up to
not,
the?
because we do it all ourselves. We just haven't got time for everything.
Yeah,
And we used to do podcasts, but they were enormously time consuming, and we've given that up. We joke that we went from something that took hours and hours to something that takes exactly 140 characters. But
yeah,
it means we're trying to be as nimble as a journal can be, which is to say not very. But we're aware that an awful lot of scientists these days are using social media for professional purposes, and they are, when they see an interesting paper, they're tweeting to each other about it, they're retweeting stuff, and so we wanted to get in on that
yeah.
and try and take advantage. So
So,
it's all about knowing what readers want and doing your best to supply it
yeah.
within the confines of the fact that no journal has as much money as it would like to have. You have to try and do what you can.
Yeah. Well, are there any last words of advice that you might give to the participants in this class about what they should keep in mind to keep a editorial office running smoothly?
Yeah, that's such a difficult question.
I
Uh,
know, I know,
it's
indeed.
it's all about the detail. I truly think that editorial people are very, very detail oriented. The people, if you're managing people, they have to be detail oriented, and you have to make sure that that's what they're doing. They really have to care where that comma goes, and whether it's spelled one way or another way in one paper, then has to be spelled the same way in another paper.
Yeah,
All that sort of continuity and care and attention that goes into making a journal look and sound and feel professional.
yeah,
And you have to be a slave to deadlines. And again, as a manager, you have to ensure that you choose people who are going to, really understand that and be willing to be slaves to deadlines as well.
yeah. That's wonderful advice. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Susan
It
Silver, for sharing this part of your evening with us.
was great fun.
And you can look at yourself on YouTube.
Oh, that won't be such fun.
And I hope perhaps that you'll continue to interact with our students down the line.
I'd be delighted anytime.
Okay. All right.
Bye.
Thanks so much, Sue.
Bye.
Bye.